Hello, I'm Amber.
And I'm Jen.
Today we are here to talk to you about mushrooms.
Specifically, microdosing mushrooms.
Yeah. So what do you want to know, Jen?
Okay, so here's the question. What is a microdose? Because I have not only heard so many of our friends talk about microdosing and think that they're microdosing, come to find out they're not actually doing a microdose. So I want to know what in your definition is actually a microdose.
Great question, Jen. A microdose to me has a very specific definition, although the term microdose is used to identify a lower level of psilocybin. So for example, when you look it up online, it'll say 10% or it'll say 0.1 of a gram to 0.3 of a gram. And that's just a general measurement, but some mushrooms are more potent than others. So it's a really difficult measurement to have because some people are at 0.3, and for me, that's not a microdose. For me, I'm fairly sensitive and it's just too much, and it's more recreational at that point. And when I work with microdoses, it's at a 0.1 generally, but the real key is that it's sub-perceptual. So when I'm microdosing or working with somebody that's microdosing, we're usually doing it for specific reasons or have a specific intention. And if that intention is to work on something and do it as a regimen, as opposed to a one-off, I just microdose today and that's just the day. But then there's the other idea of utilizing it as like a regimen. And when you're doing it as a regimen, you absolutely want the dose to be sub-perceptual. So sub-perceptual meaning that you can't really tell that you took one, which is counterintuitive for a lot of people. Sometimes people will take it and be like, I don't think it's working because I can't feel it. And then they take another one and they want to be able to feel something to validate that it's in their system. But when you do this, you do it over a regimen or a period of time, you end up taking too much, and it really makes it more confusing, and the experience is just not as helpful. So when I talk about microdosing, I'm really talking about a sub-perceptual level of psilocybin in a state where you can't really tell that it's there, but there is a compound effect that happens, and this allows you to be more present in your day and just be available and not feel like you're just floating away.
Thank you for that really thorough answer. I have seen, and probably you have seen, chocolates and tinctures and honey and all kinds of other ways to take microdoses of psilocybin mushrooms. So say I buy a chocolate bar and the person selling it to me is telling me that it's 1 square, that's a microdose. How would I know? And also, am I supposed to be measuring my microdoses at home or something? Like, how am I supposed to know it's a 0.1 versus a 0.3? And because I've never taken them before, how am I supposed to know that the dose that I'm taking is actually sub-perceptual? What would it feel like if I wasn't having that sub-perceptual experience and I was having a perceptual experience?
Well, in general, chocolates can be very inconsistent. So if you have a chocolate bar, 1 square might be more potent than another square just because of the mixture. It's really hard to get it very consistent. So therefore, I always take those with caution, and I don't really personally microdose with chocolates because of that particular thing, because you can take a square and just be tripping. And when you purchase microdosing, depending on how or where you're purchasing it from, it should have a measurement on it, or the person you're getting from should have a measurement. A lot of times I'll see big capsules where they'll have lion's mane and ashwagandha and different mixtures in with the mushroom in one capsule. And in that case, the person that is supplying it should also know how much is in there. But regardless of the amount is good to know, because it's just like a check and balance. It's like if it says if it's a 0.3 or a 0.5, likely you're going to feel it, unless, I mean, there are variables to everybody. So because of the variables, what I generally do when I'm working with somebody is I always have them test it like the first day. So sub-perceptual is, like I was saying, I don't really feel much. You know it's in your system, but you don't really feel much. And you can totally go about your day as normal. In other cases, when somebody is really sensitive or the mushroom is really strong, the weight could be the same, but the mushroom could be extra potent. So I usually have people take it the first day. And the things that you would feel if it was perceptual is, I always explain it having motion sickness, where you get a little bit woozy feeling and not necessarily nauseated, although that can happen as well. It's more just a little bit of perceptual tingles, I guess.
But
you know what this is like.
Aren't you supposed to feel good? I always hear people talking about, oh, let's take a microdose. I just want to feel good or laughy or whatever. Like,
yeah, so that's
why would you feel like you're having motion sickness?
So that's part of the recreational, or sometimes people do just take it and they like that feeling. Like I said, it's not nauseating in a bad way, but it definitely, you feel it in your system. And when that happens, that's fine as well. Depends on what your intention is. If you have the day off and you're going out to a hike or in the forest or something, or to the beach, yeah, I mean, everybody can be, it's flexible. Okay. Basically, it's flexible is the point. So the idea is, what is your intention? If you're having anxiety and you start to feel the perceptual amount, that actually might not be supportive for anxiety. In fact, mushrooms can help people with anxiety, but we find that if you're taking it at this level, it could actually induce anxiety depending on what you're dealing with internally and what your circumstance is. So there's just different reasons for taking different levels of doses. So when I'm working with somebody, we're utilizing it as a medicine, utilizing it to support mental wellness and support even transformation or growth or whatever the thing is. But we do it on a sub-perceptual level, so you can take it over a longer period of time. And in that time, you can explore. So if you do have a day off on the weekend, you can take 2 and have it be somewhat perceptual and have a little bit more of a recreational experience. But I would just caution people that have anxiety not to take too much, because that compound effect over time could definitely create anxiety more than you would want to experience.
So I've had friends who are like, I'm microdosing, or like, my husband is microdosing now, and they will take like a 0.2 or a 0.25 on the weekend, and then maybe again on a Thursday afternoon, and then a Friday afternoon, and they'll do it for 2 or 3 weeks. Is that microdosing? Because that 0.2 is above what you were just describing as what you would consider a microdose. And you talking about taking it over a longer period of time, is that enough of a period of time? Is that enough of a length of a period of time?
Well, it just all depends on the intention. Again, coming back to what is the goal here, right? If you're doing it on the weekend because you just want to feel good and you've reached the goal, then great, success. If you're doing it because you have chronic depression or PTSD, or there's just so many different ailments that people can be struggling with, and you don't even have to be in a struggle to microdose. So when I work with people, the programs that we have can be a month long, and the ones that I've seen online as well, it's like doing it 4 times a week or 3 times a week for a month, or 5 times a week is very aggressive, and that might be for somebody that's really struggling and has more severe needs. But if you're doing it 5 times a week, you're not going to want to do it for 3 months, you're going to want to do it for a shorter period of time.
Okay.
So there's lots of different variations in how you're approaching. The way that I consider the microdosing is that there's stages that you hit if you're doing it, spreading it out over time. So there's, after a couple of weeks, you might feel, if you're microdosing maybe 4 times a week, because there's a compound effect that can happen. And if you're doing it 2 times a week, then you do it once, you get the medicine in your system, then it disappears. And then you go back to default. And then you do it again, you get the medicine in your system, and then your system goes back into default, which can be helpful for those specific days. When you do it maybe 4 times a week or 3 times a week, there is a little bit of a compound effect that can happen. So there's a rolling change that can occur, as opposed to every time you do it, it's like starting from ground zero again.
Okay. I mean, that makes sense, because the friend that I'm thinking about, her husband, it's like he'll go on and off of microdosing. And coming from her, it's like sometimes it seems like it's helping him and sometimes it seems like it's not helping him. But I do know that the doses that he's taking are definitely 0.2 to 0.25. And I don't know if it matters which mushroom is actually in the capsule. But I know that he has said to me before that he doesn't like the feeling of the microdoses or the feeling of the mushrooms, or like he'll take more than just the one pill. So he'll end up taking 0.4 or 0.5. And we're talking in milligrams, right? So I just think it's interesting that it was sold to them, meaning like the person who like was selling it to them was selling it as a microdose, but to him it was never sub-perceptual. So
yeah, so this is the part where it can get really confusing, because the people that I would buy microdoses from potentially, often they're giving me too much. Often the microdose is too high. So because I've worked with so many people on it and I've seen the effects of too much versus too little or just enough, I've really been able to create like a nice sweet spot that you want to be in for specific reasons. So if your friend is struggling with something and wants the mushrooms to support mental wellness, then there's like different things that person can do. Number one, taking too much, and especially when he doesn't like the way it feels, and then taking 2 sometimes, it's not like taking an Advil.
Well, he was thinking maybe he would get used to the way it felt, or maybe it was supposed to feel like that.
Right. And then this is just lack of education in general. And a lot of people that are selling the microdoses also don't have all of that information. And it's something that where I started as well, right? Because it's just a general kind of playground right now where people are experimenting and trying different things. So there's just different reasons for different things. And some people have had lots of success doing a lot of mushrooms and just going through a big reset, right? Which is like the bigger macro dosing, bigger journeys. It's more of a reset for the system in some cases. And so that can be effective. But when you're microdosing and you're talking about helping somebody with their, like any kind of struggle they might be dealing with and they don't like the way it feels, you don't need to feel it for it to be effective. So there's more of the low and slow kind of approach of just taking a little at a time and letting the cumulative effect happen. It's not, I have a headache, let me take some Advil and hopefully the headache will go away. Where I'm having a panic attack, let me take a microdose, and maybe if I take more, then my panic will go away. It doesn't necessarily work that way. It can help in some situations. I have a friend that has acute, very chronic PTSD, and when there's a major triggering moment, a triggering effect, then she might take 2 instead of 1 microdoses for that day to help soothe that situation. But when it comes to long-term healing and reprogramming and shifting the brain and the neurogenesis, it's actually better to microdose a little bit in the sub-perceptual way and doing it a little bit more frequently, as opposed to bigger doses like twice a week or something like that.
Okay, so say here in Mexico, so we're in Mexico if you're hearing any crazy noise in the background. It's because the street is really loud. But anyways, here in Mexico, we can actually find mushrooms at the farmer's market, at certain like bazaars, at certain like just markets. And every time we see the microdoses, they're different weights. So what would you do in that case if you have access? Say, I don't know if you would have access to mushrooms. They're still illegal in the United States, even though they are being worked with some medical institutions. But if you were to come across microdoses, what would you say? Could you give me a step-by-step? Say I found some, I'm like, oh, here's a microdose. What should I do next?
Well, it just, me personally, I had to buy a scale.
Okay.
So if you're really wanting to understand and get clear with what dose works for you, I would try to figure out what type of mushroom it is, not for the sake of knowing what the differences are, but then you'll start to learn if you're really serious about figuring that out, which mushrooms are more strong than others. And then understanding what type of mushroom it is and getting a scale, because I've definitely had to pull apart microdoses and then weigh out the specific weight that I know works for me, and then put it in a drink and take it instead of taking the whole microdose that somebody sold to me. Obviously, like, you might not be that serious and to get a scale. So whoever the supplier is, I would ask them, is this, and so when I say 0.2 or 0.1 is 100 milligrams, 0.1 of a gram. So 0.2 of a gram is 200 milligrams. So however you want to verbalize that or communicate with the supplier and really find out, is this, and I always start with 0.1 at a lower potency mushroom. So if it's a high potency mushroom, I'm at 60 milligrams, 0.06, in that range. So like I said, the different variations of mushrooms, if it's something like golden teachers, it's the cubensis family, or the hillbilly, or the B+, like all of those, I would be at a 0.1 range. And that way you are at a lower dose and it's easier to test. So that when you're testing it to see, does this work for me? Then you take the 0.1 and you do it on a day when you're not having to go to work or write a bunch of emails, but you're going to journal or stretch or just do something more beneficial for yourself in a relaxing way. And you just get to find out, am I feeling it a little bit? Does this feel doable or not? Can I watch small children on this dose, right? For mothers that have small kids, this is really important, because at the sub-perceptual level, you are able to be active in your life. You're able to drive, you're able to watch small children and interact with them. And in fact, it'll make you more present, most likely. But if you're in the place where it's, okay, well, I'm starting to feel it, it's more perceptual, it can still feel doable and it can still feel nice. So some people do like that, but if you do that over and over and over again and you're doing it on a regimen, you don't want to be in that space. It just starts to cause more confusion and less presence over time. So on a day-to-day basis, it's fine, but you want to be in the sub-perceptual space.
Okay, so you just mentioned that mothers could be a good candidate. I know you're not a doctor, but could you
Definitely
share?
Not a doctor.
So this is not medical advice to anybody watching, but could you tell me or tell us who might be a good candidate to microdose?
Honestly, I feel like mushrooms are missing from our diet completely. I think that everybody is a good candidate, but that's not actually true.
Okay, so who's a bad candidate?
Yeah, so people that have any kind of extreme struggles, like extreme bipolar, schizophrenia for sure, in those cases, that's the no-fly zone. Not because I don't think personally that it could be effective or supportive, but because you want people that are dealing with those kinds of things to have a bunch of professional support and not just doing mushrooms, because they could actually onset schizophrenia and people that don't have it but maybe have the gene in their family. So that's usually the place where it's no-fly zone. People that have extreme bipolar also just dealing with so much that you then give you something that opens up your brain even more is really not supportive in that case, because some of those struggles just require a lot more professional support. So I would definitely just seek out professional help instead of going to do mushrooms without any help at all. Just regular adults in general, elderly people that are aging and starting to lose some neuromuscular, like getting slower, maybe losing a little bit of memory, adults that are just trying to unravel themselves from generational trauma or working through big change in their life or going through identity shifts, mothers with small children that need support because they may be dealing with postpartum or depression in general. And of course, it's always good to have professional support with the microdosing just in general because of the changes and you just want to have help overall, it's just a good idea. So like really a lot of different people can work with mushrooms in different ways.
Okay, so say somebody is buying mushrooms from a local supplier, they're here in Mexico, they find mushrooms at the farmer's market. What do you mean by professional help? Like working with somebody with mushrooms?
I mean, a winning combination, if you're struggling with something, is to microdose with a therapist and having integration support and having a community to talk to, or that kind of thing. Like professional help would really, to me, equivalates to having a therapist, psychologist, somebody that's on board with you also doing microdosing. And a lot of healthcare professionals are actually really on board with that. I mean, they can't professionally supply them to you at this point in the United States or anything like that, but they are usually like happy to still work with you. So be honest. And if you are working with a healthcare professional, I would say just to be honest with what you're thinking of exploring and why. And there's just make sure you're taking care of yourself no matter what. That's the end of the day. Like I'm not a psychologist or a therapist, but I definitely help a lot of people work with microdosing because I've seen a lot of patterns. I've worked with lots of people and I work with them myself on occasion so that I can help people do it in a safe way, which is why be sub-perceptual. Don't put yourself in the danger zone if you are in fact in any kind of danger. Like that's just that self-care. You need to be acutely aware of what you need to help yourself.
Yeah, I think it's super important to know that piece about letting the microdoses be sub-perceptual. And I think it's a really interesting take that you have on doing a regimen over an elongated period of time. And so is there anything else that you want to, let's say, close out this conversation with a microdosing that maybe we haven't mentioned yet?
Just in general, I just like to come at it from an exploration perspective. Don't throw yourself off a cliff with doing any kind of mind-altering substances unless you know that you are internally well-resourced and supported as well as internally as well as externally. And then in the case of microdosing, it can be flexible, it can be fun, you can be loose and explore about it. But if you're really trying to get support for something that you have intentions for, you can go deep with this medicine. This is a very sacred, beautiful medicine that isn't meant for us to like overuse or overindulge in anything else. It requires a certain level of respect. And when you come to it with that, there's so many more benefits to it rather than just feeling good. I mean, there's so many more benefits like uncovering your past lives or changing who you thought you were into the beautiful butterfly that you are now, or growing your business because now you have more confidence. There's so many more trajectories in life that you might go off on. So I would just say that there's a reason why they call them magic mushrooms, although I don't use that term. But like just coming at it with a certain level of care is always going to support you.
That's so good. All right. Well, thanks for having this conversation.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. It's been like 2 years since we've sat and chatted about mushrooms like this.
Yeah, so we're making a comeback and we're going to be here more regularly. So please join us on the next. I'm Jen and I love the mushrooms.
I'm Amber and I have a business, Mindful Rabbit, where I support people with integration and how to utilize psychedelics and primarily psilocybin as a medicine.
Yeah. And here we are in Mexico City with all of the honking. So there you go.
And our dog.